Good evening and welcome to Catholic Peekskill. Tonight for the 72nd episode and 6 years into filming, I have the honor of sitting in this seat to interview the founder of Catholic Peekskill, Father John Higgins, our pastor who will depart from us in just 2 days. And it's a tremendous honor for me to have served alongside him during my 6 years here. And so this evening we want to find out more about the man, the person who has become the incredible priest, Father John Higgins. We welcome Father Higgins to your own show.
Thank you, Father Vincent.
Father Higgins, can you tell us first of all more about your own life, where you grew up, and about your own family?
Sure. Happy to. And in fact, it feels neat to be the one receiving the questions instead of asking the questions here in Catholic Peekskill. But sure, I was born in Manhattan. My Irish father was born in New York City, and my Irish and German mom was born in just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so I was born just in St. Luke's Hospital in Manhattan, the second of their 3 children. And immediately, within a month or two, they moved up to Ossining. So we lived right on Route 9 in Ossining for a couple of years, then up to Hopewell Junction. And then finally, they built their own house up in Millbrook, New York, where I grew up, and went to Catholic school and Catholic high school. I come from a very Catholic family. Everybody in my family was a daily Mass goer. From my father, since he was a kid, since he did his first communion, would go to daily Mass. My mom likewise.
Could you share how your mother and father met?
Oh, sure. They were both involved in the church. My mom was playing and singing at a concert, a benefit concert for the St. Vincent de Paul Society. And my dad was an active member at Holy Name Parish in Manhattan and was escorting 3 or 4 blind men to this benefit Christmas concert where Bernadette Shaughnessy was going to be singing. And it so happened that sitting next to my father was a blind horse trainer by the name of John Dudley. And just to the other side of him was Bernadette Shaughnessy. And when my dad went back to the buffet or stepped away, John Dudley said to Bernadette Shaughnessy, "Oh, you have to meet this John Higgins. He's the greatest. He does so much for us, and you really want to meet him." But in the meantime, my dad had already come back, but the blind man didn't know it, so he was pointing to himself. And so that was, they first met in Christmas of 1964, and they were married by September of 1965. My dad was a confirmed bachelor, 40 years of age. Mom was only 30, so that was the age they started the family.
And so you ended up in Millbrook, and you went to which high school?
Our Lady of Lourdes High School in Poughkeepsie. Yeah.
And do you have some good memories of your time, some of those friends back there?
Oh, sure. Lots of fond memories. Not so many that I could share on Catholic Peekskill, but wonderful times in high school. I didn't feel the vocation to the priesthood very strong, except, dotted throughout my life, there was always times when people would say, "Do you think God might be calling you to be a priest?" I have 2 uncles that are priests, 2 great uncles that are priests, many cousins that are priests. And so 4th grade, a priest I went to confession to asked me the same question. I said, "Well, my uncle's a priest," and they happened to know each other, much to Father Andrew Apostoli's surprise. 8th grade, the 8th grade teacher, I remember, she said, as all the kids were going out after lunch to play in the fields behind the school, she said, "John, did you ever think about becoming a priest?" And I said, "It's not really my decision, it's God's decision. If God wants me to be a priest, I'll be a priest. If he doesn't want me to be a priest, it's not like I have a say in the matter." She just nodded patiently, and I went out and played. Fast forward now to when I was a senior in high school. I remember I used to go up to the 4th floor where, on my free period as a senior. As a senior, you were free to leave campus or stay. But there was a junior, a young lady that I like to visit. She did her study hall up there, and it just happened to be outside of Father Matthew's office. So as I was sitting there, Father Matthew called me over like that, urgently. So I went into his office. Before he could even slam the door, shut the door, he said, "John, did you ever think about being a priest?" And I remember the answer I gave back when I was in 8th grade. I said, "It's not my decision, it's God's decision. If he wants me to be a priest, I'm going to be a priest. If he doesn't want me to be a priest, I'm not going to be a priest. It's not like I have any say in the matter." And he said, "That's false." I said, "What do you mean that's false?" He said, "Let me give you an example." It was near Thanksgiving. He said, "I could invite you to Thanksgiving dinner at the rectory of St. Mary's here in Poughkeepsie, and you're free to accept or reject that invitation. But whether you accept it or reject it doesn't change the fact that I'm inviting you for Thanksgiving dinner." And it's the same with the vocation to the priesthood. God could be calling you to be a priest, and you are free to accept or reject that invitation. But whether you accept it or reject it doesn't change the fact that God is calling you. And at that moment, I knew that God was speaking to me. But I pushed it way in the back of my mind because the young lady who was sitting outside. But it was really emblazoned in my mind.
Where did college take you?
So college took me to the other side of the United States, to Thomas Aquinas College, which is a small liberal arts college, which truly strives to maintain its Catholic identity. It's very small. It's a great books school, meaning they don't really use textbooks. It's all original sources. So instead of reading a physics textbook, you'd read a book by Isaac Newton. You'd read the writings of Einstein, and so on, philosophy, theology, and literature. And there's no lectures. Everyone sits around a big table, and they discuss and debate what is the author saying, and is it true what the author is saying. So it was there that I deepened my faith significantly. I started going to daily Mass when I was a freshman because there was a kind of a positive peer pressure there. A lot of my friends, my newly made friends, who I loved very much, they would go to daily Mass, and I could feel the tug and the inspiration that they gave me. So I started going, and sure enough, that same old question kept coming back about that Monsignor Father Matthew was asking me back when I was a senior in high school, and others along the way. Is God calling me to be a priest? And I remember I was dating a girl in my junior year of college, for 6 months on into my senior year. But every time I would go to pray, I couldn't. It was like the elephant in the living room, that expression where the Lord would say, "She's very nice, but I have something else for you." And when I couldn't take it anymore, and that was October 24th, 1989, that's the day that I knew I could not act on this sense that God was calling me. But it still took me a full week to get up the nerve to break up with this wonderful young lady who's now happily and joyfully married and has wonderful children. And although I don't keep contact, but I know she's thriving in every way. But even from that day of October 24th, 1989, I never had a doubt, not for a second, that this was what God was calling me to do. I could also say I never felt worthy in all those coming close to 30 years now that God was calling me to do this. But I never doubted this was what he was calling me to do.
And you shared with the parishioners recently that there was a night when you were at Thomas Aquinas College and you woke up in the middle of the night with a thought that was just burning in your head. Can you share that?
Sure. I remember I was a sophomore in college, and apropos of nothing, in the middle of the night from a sound sleep, I was instantly awake, and I knew I had to write something down. So I went over to the blotter on my desk and I wrote, "Faith is the willingness to leave." And I put the date, April 19th, and I went back to bed. I woke up the next morning thinking I was going to find something super significant on the blotter. And in the morning didn't seem that significant. But now, in retrospect, I could see how God has used that phrase that, has a biblical root, because Abraham, our father in faith, was called to leave, to go out, and many times you see these signs of God's calling, and me personally, even now, the call to leave. But maybe that was partly in my mind when, in my discernment to figure out where God was calling me to be a priest, because even though on October 24th, 1989, I knew God was calling me to be a priest, I didn't know where or how. I thought maybe I was supposed to be a monk or a Franciscan friar, and I had all these great ideas and a great idealism to be a crazy Franciscan or a Carthusian monk. But in the course of that time, I discerned. I went to various places. Where am I supposed to serve, Lord? And I visited one religious order, and I couldn't sleep. I went there, and I just couldn't, and I never have trouble sleeping. And another religious order, same thing, I couldn't. And then I went on a discernment weekend at St. Joseph's Seminary in Yonkers, New York, the diocesan seminary for the archdiocese, as we know. And I slept like a log. I said, "This is the place for me." Yeah. And one interest in the course of that year after graduation from college, where I was trying to discern, God, where are you calling me? I remember it just happened to be the 100th anniversary of my home parish, St. Joseph's in Millbrook, a beautiful church up in the country, right in the middle of Dutchess County. And that time I had the habit of genuflecting before receiving communion. I went back to my seat and I stayed after to pray, which was a habit instilled in me in Thomas Aquinas College, because many of the students did that. And afterwards, Cardinal O'Connor sent someone in there and said, "Bring me that young man." So he put his hand on my shoulder. I introduced myself, and he said, "Why don't you study for my archdiocese?" And I said, "Okay." And I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Before you entered the seminary, you spent a little time with Catholics United for the Faith.
Yeah. So
what was that about?
So I, in that year where I knew God was calling me to be a priest, I needed at once to start to pay back my college loans, and to figure out where God was calling me. I had originally agreed to work there for 2 years, but everything happened so quickly, and they were very gracious to release me from that verbal agreement that we had made, and so I was freed up to enter into St. John Neumann residence, and then St. Joseph Seminary. So I was ordained on May 11th, 1996, over 20 years ago. And
then where were you first assigned? And tell us a little bit of your life that got you to Assumption.
Okay, sure. So ordination, I guess, where one is configured to the priesthood, was a glorious moment, experience. Just for any young man who is ordained a priest, it's just an overwhelming experience, and joyful, and extremely moving in ways that words can't tell. But I remember afterwards, we went to the back to Our Lady's Chapel. I think they do it differently now, but right after your ordination, you received your letter of assignment, and it was read by Bishop Sheridan, who was the Vicar General. May he rest in peace now. But Bishop Sheridan said that Father John Higgins is going to the best parish in the Archdiocese of New York, Holy Rosary in the Bronx. And he said it because he was the pastor previously to Holy Rosary in the Bronx. And so there it was. So June 1st of 1996, I began my assignment. What a joyful assignment it was. Monsignor Hamilton was there as my first pastor, and then later on Father Robert Corrado was my pastor, and it was just the joyful life of a priest. I taught in the school a lot in CCD. I was actually the director of religious education for the CCD program, RCIA. Every aspect of the parish was fun and part of my priestly life. Until the time came to move on, and that was June 22nd of 2002, when I became the parochial vicar of St. Gregory Barbarigo Church in Garnerville, New York, right across the river here from Catholic Peekskill. And there I spent 3 years. And there again, I had two pastors, two great men, Father Jay Backus and Father Rob McKeown were my two pastors there, and it was very different from a Bronx parish to have a suburban parish in northern Rockland, and I loved it there as well. And it was there that I began my devotion to Our Lady of Victory, traveling to Our Lady of Victory Church in Manhattan. And since then, because everything I asked for from Our Lady of Victory I got, that's when I began to make those card magnets that you can still see around Catholic Peekskill, where people have their Our Lady of Victory card magnets on their vehicles. But and then I got the call in the summer of 2005, when at that time Monsignor Desmond O'Connor was the head of personnel, and he said, "Father Higgins, it's time for you to move." I said, "Where am I going?" And they said, "You're going to Assumption Church in Peekskill, New York." I said, "Does it have a school?" And he said, "Let me check." "Yes, it does. It does have a school." "Great, wonderful. Count me in." Of course, I would have said yes no matter what, because my philosophy has always been never request, never refuse an assignment. And I always stood by that. So I arrived on September 1st of 2005 here at Assumption Church in Peekskill, this wonderful place that at that time I couldn't have known that I was going to love it as much as I did.
What was your initial impression with Monsignor Ansbro?
Well, that's great, because thanks for asking that. I remember coming over and Deacon Roberts said, "Let me meet you at the train station. And it's a little hard to get to." So I met Deacon Roberts at the train station, and I followed him up and parked in the church parking lot, and then we went in. And we went upstairs, and I met the good Monsignor Ansbro. And he said, "You're going to like it here." And that was an understatement from the Monsignor. And that was a little bit before I arrived officially, and then I came. It's been just a wonderful experience.
It's a little unfair because you could probably fill up many programs with the next couple questions, but maybe
Okay.
in brief,
Sure.
what would be some of the highlights of the first 6 years? As a pastor, you were installed October 1st, 2006. Got you to 2012. Some things that come to mind over those first 6 years.
Sure, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, to be the parochial vicar for the first year was a blessing, because you're not in charge, but you get to meet everybody. And then as Monsignor Ansbro was turning 80, the diocese said that you're going to be the new pastor. I said, "Thank you." And I remember the very deciding moment on that, when October 1st came, and we had dinner that night, and Monsignor Ansbro sat in the pastor's seat. And then so he made sure to get down there plenty early, and he absolutely refused to sit in the pastor's seat anymore. I said, "Monsignor, please." He said, "No, you sit there." And very humbly, he moved to what was my parochial victim seat, as we sometimes joke. And for me, that one little anecdote spoke volumes, and was a great highlight for me. Assumption Church has been through a lot of changes. I remember in those early years, one of our greatest struggles was to financially keep the school going. And so we did so many great efforts, and in this I give so much credit to Mrs. Audrey Warren, who was our director of development. She did so much. I mean, there were some years where we raised as much as $300,000 to $400,000. There's no Catholic elementary schools that did that kind of fundraising, and it sadly proved not to be enough. But at least we had the satisfaction of knowing we did the absolutely most we possibly could, including, and you were with me, when we walked down to St. Patrick's Cathedral as a fundraiser, not once but twice, to try to raise money to support our Catholic school. And even though I think the total was way over maybe $130,000 that we raised in those efforts, it didn't prove effective in the long run. And yet still, it was so worthwhile to do it because of how it helped us to grow as a parish, and me personally as a priest.
I remember coming back from the walk that I went on the second day of the first year, which was from the seminary to St. Patrick's, and it was 18 miles. And I was back in the 7th grade telling them, and I was imitating how you were walking up the stairs at St. Patrick Cathedral, because in 2 days you had walked, 58 miles, and you were walking hunched over, and every step was causing you pain. And I was hoping they would laugh, and I look up, and there's a little girl with a tear coming down. I said, "Are you okay?" She says, "He loves us." And all the girls started to cry. It was a great experience. So taking us from 2012 to present day, your second term, which we know has been cut short a year through this recent transfer. What are some thoughts that come to mind over the last 5 years?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, the year 2013 was a year of great loss for me. And I can tell you what grieved me by far the most was not the loss of my dear dad in September of that year, not the loss of Monsignor Ansbro, who was like a father to me and to you as well, I know, Father Vincent, but the closing of the school. Because I know my dad will live forever in heaven, Monsignor Ansbro will live forever in heaven, but when the school closed. And there's no such thing as school heaven. And I think a lot of kids, if they thought there was going to be school in heaven, they'd be very disappointed. But so 2013 marked a turning point. But what it showed is that there's so much strength in Assumption Parish that wasn't necessarily connected to the school. And in the course of these years, I think of our wonderful catechetical program. When I first came to Assumption, there was 125 kids in CCD. And as of this past year, there was over 700 kids. So in the course of these 11 years, there's been a tremendous amount of growth. So when I think of those arching years and these two assignments as the pastor of Assumption, two terms as the pastor of Assumption Church, I think of the wonderful growth, especially in our Spanish community, and how that was a source of great joy. The number of baptisms, not many churches in the Archdiocese of New York that has as many baptisms. Last year we had 58 weddings at Assumption Church. I don't think there's too many churches that have 58 weddings at the church.
A lot of confessions in that church too.
A lot of confessions. Hours and hours every week, of course, and that's our priestly joy is to hear confessions. So, isn't it true, Father Vincent? A lot of times the joys that we have, you can't really highlight it, but it's what happens in service of God's people, in their sanctification, in carrying their burdens, forgiving their sins, blessing their marriages, and ushering them to eternity. Those are graces that you can't necessarily put on a resume, but they fill you with joy and make your life very complete.
On that, I do want to ask, how have you changed as a priest or as a pastor during your time at Assumption, or maybe better to put, how have the people of Assumption changed you?
Wow. Thank you for that question. I think of one line from Saint Jose Maria Escrivá. He used to say, "Diamonds are polished by diamonds, and souls are polished by souls." And I hope God's people, I've grown in polish, in a sense, and some of the hard edges knocked off, some of the rough patches smoothed over by service to His people. I think it's taught me to be more patient because the way the Lord makes His church grow is natural. It's growth. It grows like children. Children don't grow overnight. They grow consistently. They do have growth spurts, of course, but you can't force that growth. You have to allow God to be the one to cause the growth.
And what advice would you give to the next pastor, whoever will eventually be installed?
Well, that's good. I recently heard a bishop down in the brand new bishop in Pensacola, Florida, Bishop Wack, I think his name is pronounced. It looked like it's spelled like whack. But he said something interesting. He said when he became a pastor there in Texas, the bishop said, "You are entering into a community that has its own structure and way, and I want you to respect that and not make changes. Learn where you're going." He said, "I'm going now to Pensacola, Florida, and I have a lot to learn from you." And I think the people of Assumption will love him very much, whoever he is. And I think that love will change him and help that pastor to be the extraordinary leader that Assumption Church both needs and in some ways deserves.
And what is on your mind as you await in 48 hours about to depart Assumption Church, Peekskill?
Well, I know I'm going to have my farewell mass, and there's a lot of sadness in parting, but I feel like the words of Shakespeare are applicable. Parting is such sweet sorrow. I try not to think about the separation and the sorrow that is, but the joy of the expressions of love that God's people have been showering on me since this announcement. For that very much fills my heart.
And, you know, is there a last message you can send to the audience of Catholic Peekskill on this your last episode?
Well, maybe I could give a blessing. I would like to give a blessing.
Please.
Yes. May the Lord be with you, and may Almighty God bless you, God's holy people, and all who watch this program, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
I can't overemphasize what a pleasure and incredible learning experience it's been to me to be at Father Higgins' side for 6 years as a parochial vicar. My life is forever changed as a man, but most especially as a priest, as not just vicar, but I believe truly, as Jesus says, I call you friend, and I consider Father Higgins a dear and great friend. And it's my privilege to be at his side this night in this final episode of Catholic's Peekskill with Father Higgins present. Thank you for your attention. May God bless you, and good night.